Are you a tree with a strong out of three? Stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree?
Welcome to Strange Things, broadcasting from the Arkanasa Radio Studios in Laredo, Texas. And welcome to the show. I'm your host, Chris James. It just wouldn't be a week without some kind of horrific computer problems, things that drive me nuts when I'm trying to do a show. But at long last, I managed to get all the little lights to blinking and hopefully the recording going correctly. Anyway, tonight we're going to be talking about, before we get into that, I had originally planned to do an entire show on William Cooper and his book, Behold the Pale Horse. After reading the book, I decided maybe just a short piece would be better. It's a long book, but I don't think I could talk about it for an hour without getting tied up in some of his ideas. Milton 6, 1943, and he died on November 5th, 2001. William was an American conspiracy theorist, radio broadcaster, and the author of the best known for his 1991 book, Behold the Pale Horse. He warned us about multiple global conspiracies, some involving extraterrestrials. Cooper also described how HIV and AIDS was actually a man-made disease used to target black people, Hispanics, and homosexuals, and that a cure had been made before the disease was released on the planet. I know AIDS is not a disease, but that's how they referred to it in the book. Cooper has been described as a militia theoretician. In his book, William Cooper tells about his time in the Navy. He served on board a submarine, the USS Tiru, which was stationed out of Hawaii. While on patrol, William was standing watch on the bridge when a huge flying saucer emerged from the ocean. It flew about in the sky and then it slipped beneath the waves once more. There had been two other men stationed on the bridge at the time, and they both got to see this spectacular airborne display. Once the boat was back at base, the three men were grilled by naval intelligence as to what they had seen. They were taken into a room one by one and pretty much told they were mistaken as to what they had seen in the sky. William said he was told to sign some papers saying he would keep his mouth shut about the thing that he never saw. Later in his career, Cooper was assigned to the Naval Intelligence Station in Hawaii. He was the Operational Status Reporting Office, where he was in charge of decryption of coded messages coming into and going out of Hawaii. During his time there, Cooper was privy to a whole bunch of classified documents dealing with extraterrestrial encounters. He also came across some documents dealing with military actions that many would consider as close to treason as a person could get without actually facing a firing squad. He read about plans to create an environment in the United States that would allow for the government to ignore the Constitution and turn the country into a dictatorship run under the disguise of a one-world government. When I joined the Army, I swore an oath that went just like this. I, Chris James, do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, and that I will obey the orders of the President of the United States and the orders of the officers appointed over me, according to regulations and the Uniform Code of Military Justice, so help me God. Support and defend the Constitution of the United States. Not the world, not the UN, the United States. Everyone who serves in the military swears an oath saying the same thing. Support and defend the Constitution. Not change it to fit into some plan to turn the world into a utopia that would only benefit the elites who plan on running things. People get this crazy idea that if we all work together, the planet will be a paradise. This would be true if not for the fact we have so many people out there who believe they are so much smarter than the rest of us, and therefore they should make all the rules that the rest of us would have to live by, while they got all the benefits of the planet. Cooper went into a lot of detail about how the shadow government was planning on creating an environment where they could take over. They wanted to do away with not just the Second Amendment, but the rest of them as well. Cooper became convinced the shadow government was going to launch an attack on either Thanksgiving or some other holiday when most patriotic Americans would be home with their families. The authorities would kick in the door and haul away anyone who they deemed might try to stop the takeover of our country. He was convinced the government was going to try to kill him before he could get the word out. William and his wife began carrying guns around with them all the time. He spotted unmarked police cars outside his home on many occasions. His mail was being read by somebody other than him, and his phone had been tapped. Cooper began looking into UFO reports. He amassed a huge collection of reports and would attend conferences and speak about what he'd found in his investigations. The longer Cooper worked on his ideas, the more paranoid he became. He began to accuse other investigators of being government agents. Everybody was on his list, with the exception of Linda Moulton Howe, who he considered to be the only true believer out there. Cooper went so far as to claim that Stanton Friedman, the godfather of ufology, was a government agent because he had worked for the government. It's true Stanton Friedman was a nuclear physicist who had been in the employ of a government-financed company, but I don't believe Stanton Friedman was ever an undercover operative for the CIA. Now, there were those. Richard Doty was a government agent who specialized in handing out UFO information to unsuspecting investigators and then making the investigators look like a total fool. One of his victims was Paul Bennewitz. Paul was a UFO researcher who was set up and discredited by the disinformation campaign in which Richard Doty played a crucial part. Bennewitz had witnessed and filmed several UFOs which he had sighted on the ground and in the air near Kirtland Air Force Base and the Manzano Range in New Mexico. He managed to establish communications with the occupants of the UFOs. Afraid they might be building a secret base that would be unknown to the United States government, Paul contacted security personnel at Kirtland to tell them what he had found. Government agents began working with Paul and feeding him all kinds of information. False information. Paul then would release this information to other investigators, thinking he was on to some truth regarding UFOs. Once Paul was established as being a highly regarded UFO investigator, the steps were taken to discredit him and make it look as if he were going nuts. They even arrested him and placed him in a hospital for psychological evaluation. He was found to have nothing wrong with him, so they released him. And then later they rearrested him and threw him back in the hospital for a psychological evaluation once more. Paul Bennewitz lost his job and his family. He became so sick he was unable to work. He died on June 23rd, 2003, the victim of a government disinformation ploy. So there were government agents running around handing out lies, but Cooper thought everyone was working for the government. And he kept saying the government was trying to kill him. A lot of what Cooper thought and said was unfounded. For example, he was convinced the driver of John Kennedy's car was the one that shot him. Cooper had gotten hold of a copy of the Zapruder film, and he would show it at gatherings. He would slow it way down so the audience could see how the Secret Service agent William Greer, the driver, turned and looked over his shoulder at Kennedy. It did kind of look as if he had something in his hand, but it wasn't a gun. Had Greer shot Kennedy, Kennedy would have been thrown back and to the right. We all know he went back and to the left. Cooper was absolutely convinced it was Greer who shot Kennedy. My question is, why did Greer stop the car? I was always taught when I worked for the government, if somebody was shooting at you, you hit the gas and got the heck out of there. Especially if you were driving the President of the United States. You sure didn't want to stop while bullets were flying, but Greer did. Once Cooper was convinced Greer was the shooter, other investigators came forward and claimed Cooper was nuts. He was wrong, but I think he was set up, just like Bennewitz would be later on. Then again, Cooper got a lot of things right. On page 200, Cooper gives the details of Oklahoma House Bill 1750, which had been passed in 1991. It said everyone living in Oklahoma had to declare every item they owned to the local tax assessor. Everything. Art collections, cars, bikes, and especially guns. Any rifles or pistols had to be listed on your tax assessor's report. This would have given the government a list of every single gun owned by citizens of the United States that lived in Oklahoma. This was a test run to see if it would get passed by the legislators without being spotted by the citizens. If the citizens didn't give an accurate list of everything they owned, they would be fined as much as 20% of the value of the items not listed. Why is gun registration wrong, you might ask? It goes hand in hand with concealed carry. If the bad guys don't know who's armed, they won't know if anyone or everyone is carrying a handgun, and therefore the bad guys will not try to rob anyone thinking they just might be able to defend themselves. If the shadow government doesn't know who all has firearms at home, they would have to search every house in the country instead of just attacking those who are registered. The Second Amendment is not for home defense against crooks who try to break into your home. The Second Amendment is to protect our homes from the shadow government that will try to overthrow our Constitution. I swore an oath when I joined the Army. I was never unsworn. So the oath is still applying today as it did the day I took it. Because Cooper raised an alarm regarding HB 1750, citizens began calling their state representatives and complaining about this breach of privacy. Because of the outcry, HB 1750 was amended, leaving out the taxation list. William Cooper wrote quite a book. I would tell you to go buy a copy and read it, but be careful. There are a lot of mistakes dealing with things such as the protocols of the elders of Zion. Cooper believed that these were real. Behold a Pale Horse is not a good read if you're not well versed in occulted history. You might begin to believe things that are not actually correct. If, on the other hand, you have a good grasp of conspiracies and you want to fill in a few of the gaps, I say get a copy today and read it. It is well worth your time. William Cooper was convinced the government was going to try to kill him. On November 5th, 2001, the FBI, along with the Apache County Sheriff's deputies, attempted to arrest Cooper at his Eager, Arizona home on tax evasion charges. During the ensuing shootout, one deputy and William Cooper were killed. It looks like the government did kill him after all. And now for Fort Knox. Fort Knox is a United States Army post in Kentucky, south of Louisville and north of Elizabethtown. It is also adjacent to the United States Bullion Depository, which is used to house a large portion of the United States official gold reserves. The 109,000-acre, 170-square-mile base covers a part of Bullitt, Hardin, and Meade counties. It currently holds the Army Human Resources Center, which includes the Army Human Resources Command. For 60 years, Fort Knox was the home of the U.S. Army Armor Center and the U.S. Army Armor School. The fort was used by both the Army and the Marine Corps to train crews on the use of tanks in combat. A lot of foreign military folks are trained at Fort Knox as well. The history of the U.S. Army's cavalry and armored forces is on display at the General George S. Patton Museum. I must say it was cool being able to look at a German Tiger tank from World War II. There was also a lot of information on the history concerning George Patton. The fortifications were first constructed near the site in 1861. The Civil War had just started when Fort Duffield was built. The Fort Duffield was located on what was known as Muldrow Hill on a strategic point overlooking the confluence of the Salt and Ohio rivers and the Louisville and Nashville Turnpike. The area was contested by both Union and Confederate forces. Bands of organized guerrillas frequently raided the area during the war. John Hunt Morgan of the 2nd Kentucky Cavalry for the Confederate Army raided the area before staging his famous raid on Indiana and Ohio, which was known as Morgan's Raid. After the war, the area was occupied by the Army, and it also became home to various small communities. Families of the soldiers who needed some place to live, as well as the folks who worked to support the military. As time moved on, the area was used by various military units as a training site. By 1918, a permanent camp was established. The new camp was named after Henry Knox, the Continental Army's chief of artillery during the Revolutionary War and our country's first Secretary of War. The camp was extended to handle the soldiers during World War I. The temporary buildings were thrown up to accommodate the influx of men who needed to be trained before being sent off to the trenches in Belgium and France. At the end of the war, the fort was reduced and used mostly for National Guard members, the reserve officer training, and citizens military training camp. At this time, the place was named Camp Henry Knox National Forest. The Federal Reserve System is the central banking system of the United States. It is not owned by the United States. The Fed has to pay taxes on their buildings. They also have to pay postage. The Federal Reserve is a privately owned bank that owns our money. It was created on December 23, 1913, after a group of conspirators thought up this endeavor and then bribed certain members of Congress to give the Fed control of our money. The premise given to the government and the citizens was, by giving total control of our banks to one big bank, our country would never endure a depression or a recession. Well, they did nothing to stave off the Great Depression of the 1930s or the recession of the 2000s. It seems as if the Federal Reserve isn't working, but Congress isn't likely to do anything to fix the problem. And Kennedy tried. In April of 1963, he began printing United States notes as opposed to Federal Reserve notes. That was April 1963, and look what happened in November of that same year. In the Constitution, Section 8, it permits Congress to coin money and to regulate its value. I don't see any mention of a private bank being allowed to control our money. It says Congress must do it. In 1933, Executive Order 6102 was signed by President Roosevelt. It made it a criminal offense for U.S. citizens to own or trade gold anywhere in the world, with the exception of some jewelry and collector's coins. One reason going around as to why the government criminalized gold was because the Federal Reserve had printed too many dollar bills that were backed by a limited amount of gold. There were 3 times as many dollar bills as there was gold to back them. If everyone went to their bank and cashed in their dollars for gold, the banks would run out of gold long before the citizens ran out of paper money. Most people also knew that gold was worth more than the $20.67 an ounce that the U.S. government was redeeming gold at. What was the government to do to alleviate this problem? The United States Gold Reserve Act of January 30th, 1934 required that all gold and gold certificates be surrendered to the United States Department of the Treasury. The government paid its $20.67 an ounce for the gold people were forced to surrender. And they paid them in paper dollars. A gold depository was built at Fort Knox, Kentucky, because it was considered to be far enough inland to make it near impossible for an enemy to land an attack on the United States and seize our gold. There's a story that says the area chosen for the gold deposits is over a huge set of underground caves that could also be used for storage of other valuable items. This might have also been a sneaky access point should some underhanded politician want to plunder the riches of the United States. Once most of the gold held by the U.S. citizens was now in the hands of the politicians, they raised the price of gold to $35 an ounce, thus giving the government a huge increase in value of the gold only they had. Foreign governments began selling gold to the United States to make the most of this sudden increase in value. The prohibitions on owning gold were relaxed starting in 1964 when gold certificates were once more being sold to private investors on April 24, 1964. It was still illegal to demand gold as payment for any deposits. By 1975, Americans could again freely own and trade gold. In October 1976, the government officially changed the definition of the dollar. Any references to gold were removed from the statutes. From this point, the international monetary system was made of pure fiat money. In other words, our money was no longer based on how much gold we had. So, what is all that gold in Fort Knox for? Gold wasn't the only valuable item held at Fort Knox. During World War II, many valuables from England and Europe were sent to the United States for safekeeping. The crown jewels of several countries were stored in the gold depository. The Declaration of Independence, as well as the original Constitution, were safeguarded in one of the underground vaults. Today, there's a huge supply of drugs kept there in case of some world crisis. Fort Knox is located inland, so any enemy would find it difficult to launch any kind of a water-based assault. This plan was put in place long before the idea of airborne troops had been thought of. The actual Fort Knox is a military base with thousands of troops stationed there. There are tanks and scouts, infantry as well as air assault units. If somehow a person were able to get by all of those defenses, you'd still have the gold depository defenses to overcome. There is the outer fence, and nothing special, just a fence that shows where the perimeter is. Every tree was cut down, giving what is known as clear fields of fire, so there's no place to hide once you step over the fence. The ground is flat and the grass is kept cut short. Under the ground are electronic sensors that go off if anything bigger than a squirrel steps down on the ground. There may also be landmines scattered about the entire area between the first and second fence. As you approach the building in the middle of the fenced-in land, there is an electric fence. It's 10 feet high, and it's charged with enough juice to make your hair stand on end. The fence is reinforced with concrete, so driving through it would be a bad idea. The government loves to be redundant and repetitious. Inside the electric fence is a second electric fence, just in case you didn't get the full picture when you touched that first one. Once you're inside the second electric fence, there's a great big black wrought iron fence that is there mostly for show. It was the original fence put up back in 1937. Now, once you've negotiated the 4 fences you had to get over, you have to get inside the building. The walls are 4 feet thick and made from granite. The windows are all bulletproof, and they're blackened so you can't see in and tell if there's anybody in there looking back out at you. The floor is made up of several layers of concrete and reinforced with steel. The door weighs 22 tons and will resist a direct hit with a missile. If you're good at picking locks, you have to be quick because every side of the building is under constant CCTV monitoring. Once inside, there are said to be many defenses that no one is willing to talk about. The hallways are supposed to have piped-in gas that can fill the airspace with some deadly concoction that will either kill you or at best incapacitate you. Then there are supposed to be other pipes that will fill the building with water, making it somewhat hard to breathe. The vaults where the gold is kept are made from 27 inches of steel and concrete. A cutting torch would be useless because of the concrete, and a hammer would be hard to use because of the steel. Should you somehow survive long enough to open one of the vaults and grab the gold, you'd only be able to carry a few bars at best. And if you have one in each hand, you won't be able to open the door on the way out. The entire time you're on the wrong side of that fence, there are armed guards everywhere who are not there for public relations purposes. Way back in the 1450s, when Prince Vlad, we know him as Vlad Tepes or Vlad the Impaler, and sometimes we call him Dracula, no one was willing to steal anything, even if it was gold. At the local well, where everybody went to get water, Vlad had a gold drinking ladle placed on the edge of the well. The ladle was encrusted in jewels that were well worth a man's lifetime of wages. No one ever tried to steal it. There were no guards keeping an eye on the gold drinking utensil. The closed-circuit TV wasn't going to be invented for another 492 years. No fences or dogs. Not even a scarecrow was put in place to keep somebody from stealing this gold and jeweled drinking device. What kept the golden ladle safe, you might ask? It was just the thought of what would happen should someone try to steal the ladle. Vlad had a way of dealing with thieves as well as prisoners of war or people who pissed him off. The name Impaler wasn't just a nickname. Vlad actually impaled those who landed on the wrong side of him. If you want to hear more about Prince Vlad, check out the show from June 25th, 2016. I go into a lot more detail on that interesting fellow from Romania. I'm going to take a brief pause here, play a couple of commercials, and drink some coffee, so don't go away. We'll be right back after this, provided my soundboard is still working. You're listening to Arkanasa Radio. Makeup isn't something you want to just smear on and hope for the best. You might come out looking like Lon Chaney. Call Lourdes James, independent beauty consultant, and get a free makeover to see how makeup should be done. 956-723-3019. Coffee makes the world go round. And around here, we have the Organic Man Coffee Trike, 4501 McPherson, Suite number 9. If you're not looking for coffee, try their tea. It's the best in town. And remember, life is too short to drink bad coffee. Did you go out UFO hunting and couldn't focus on the sky? Swing on by Del Norte Optical, 107 Calle Del Norte, right across from the Embassy Suites. That's not a weather balloon, that's a flying saucer. Did you hear a bump in the night and you think it just might be a ghost? Contact the Laredo Paranormal Research Society at laredoparanormal@hotmail.com. That's the LPRS for all your otherworldly needs. This is Arkanasa Radio you've been listening to. And welcome back to the show. I'm just experiencing some really strange things here on my computer. My little pointer arrow, the cursor, has disappeared, and I'm having to guess as to where it's located. Such fun having technical problems right in the middle of a show. It just wouldn't be a show without some kind of a craziness going on, like a cat yowling, or my dog barking, or the phone ringing, or some craziness. Anyway, like that. Don't want to talk to anybody during the show if they're not a guest. On September 23rd, 1974, Mary Brooks, the director of the Mint, took a group of congressmen and a few reporters inside the gold depository to see if there actually was any gold in there. They had to remove the seals from the door for some unknown reason. Mary kept saying they had to be careful not to break the seals. If you're opening a sealed room, you break the seals, unless the seals will be reused, which would mean they could be removed and replaced any time a person wanted access to the gold without all the bother of telling the folks who sealed the room. This would kind of nullify the whole purpose of having seals on the door in the first place. This right here gives me the impression that the vaults have been tampered with on many previous occasions. They open one vault and they show a stack of gold bars from floor to ceiling. Impressive, yes. But they only looked into one room. The door had a number 33 written above it. This gives the impression there are at least 32 other rooms exactly like this one. But the audit folks only opened one room. Let's just assume the other 32 or so rooms had gold in them as well. The area occupied by the gold bars didn't look nearly big enough to hold 8,133 tons of gold that was supposed to be in the depository. It kind of looked like a circus with all the people going ooh and ah, oh look, gold. The people in the room looked more like a bunch of school kids than a bunch of adults who were there for a reason. The auditors took down one gold bar and they weighed it. Some guy was holding the scale in his arms, and somebody else places the gold bar on the scale, and the dial moves up and down because the guy holding the scale couldn't hold it still. It sure looked as if the bar was the correct weight, but you never weigh something while holding the scale. But some excited guy wouldn't set the scale down, so you got to watch this on the news for a few seconds. Eventually, somebody discovered that you had to set the scale down, and they set the bar down on it, and sure enough, it weighed the correct amount. Assuming that the scale wasn't off any, they finally put the scale on the table and they weighed the gold bar. Well, yes, the gold bar weighed the right amount. The whole room was probably full of nothing but gold bars that all weighed the same. What did the visit prove? It proved there is a room full of gold bars in Fort Knox. One room. What about the rest of that 81 piles of gold measuring 6 foot by 6 foot by 6 foot? It literally took an act of Congress to get inside the gold vault and see if the gold was there. Yes, I understand security. You can't just let people walk in off the street and see what amounts to a king's ransom. Well, several kings. Maybe a few hundred kings at that. But we're expected to believe the government. In fact, we're expected to believe the folks who tell the government the gold is still there. The government can't even get inside to see for sure. So we are to believe the gold is there because someone told them to tell us it's there. The government would never lie, but they have. On so many occasions, it's hard to believe anything they say anymore. A U.S. Mint spokesman said in an email statement to a company called MoneyWatch that the accounting firm KPMG, which audits the mint, has been present in the vault at Fort Knox. The mint wouldn't comment on exactly how much gold is in there. A KPMG is a professional service company that goes around the world and checks on how much giant companies are worth. They are headquartered out of Amstelveen in the Netherlands. So a company out of the Netherlands can look and see if our gold is still there, but our congressman, whom we elect, can't. The Congressman Ron Paul from Texas wants to audit the Federal Reserve as well as look inside the gold depository to be sure all the gold and not just one room full is still there. He tried to get a bill through Congress, but those guys just refused to do anything that might be perceived as helping out the country they were elected to serve. We are told that as of November 2017, Fort Knox was holding 8,133 metric tons with a market value of over $100 billion. Picture a pile of gold bars 6 feet high, 6 feet wide, and 6 feet deep. That's about 100 tons of gold. Now picture 81 piles just like that one. That's a lot of gold. But in 1950, the gold depository was said to have 20,000 tons of gold in its vault. 20 tons. 2017, they said they had 8,133 tons. Okay, what happened to the other 11,867 tons of gold they said they had back in 1950? They may have sold some of it to other governments. The Federal Reserve sold our gold to other countries. More than half the gold at Fort Knox was sold, or maybe all of it. How do we know? Nobody can go look and see how much is still there. One reason the government might not want to audit our gold is because it would lend importance to an asset that is sworn to be unimportant. Our money is not based on gold, but on the idea that it's worth something. A dollar is worth a dollar because they tell us it's worth a dollar. Get it? An audit would give gold too much credit and start to erode the official propaganda that gold is not a monetary asset. The gold in Fort Knox is there because the government owns it, but they won't tell us what they do with it. An audit would raise more questions than it would answer. Like, if the gold is really there, does it really all belong to the government? There has always been gold in the depository that belonged to other countries. How much gold is theirs and how much is ours? We don't know, and they won't tell us. The central banks routinely lease or lend out gold, but current reporting guidelines don't require them to distinguish between gold owned outright and gold swapped with other parties. It's just like when you get a loan at the bank. You go in and borrow, say, $200,000 to buy a house. You don't walk out the door with a sack full of money. The bank gives you a piece of paper with $200,000 written on it. They also give a piece of paper to the realtor with the same amount printed on it. Now you own a home. Well, you and the bank. The money never moves from one place to another. It's just numbers on a page. This lack of transparency leads the way to abuse. If nobody is watching to be sure a person isn't stealing, how do we know the person isn't stealing? Trust? Do you really trust the government? Have they ever actually lied to us? Let's see. Operation Northwoods. The government was going to commit acts of terrorism so they could crack down on our freedoms. The operation was discussed among the command structure of our military. Once the meeting was over, all the paperwork involved was supposed to be destroyed. Someone forgot to burn his copies and they fell into the wrong hands. The wrong hands being someone who went public. The Gulf of Tonkin incident. The government said North Vietnam attacked one of our ships so they could retaliate and increase the number of troops in the country. The ship wasn't so much attacked by North Vietnam, but the government said it was so they could get more heavily involved in the war over there. And how about Watergate? Well, I could do a whole show just on that one. It very well could be all the gold in Fort Knox has been sold or loaned out to other governments. And the gold that is on loan might be loaned to other governments, like back to us. It would be like that time I was on detail. I was on detail, the sign cutting unit, for a year. During that time, I was put on detail to special ops for 4 years, for 4 months. And at the same time, I was detailed to the bridge operation for a month. So on paper, there were 3 agents on duty, while it was all just me. I was on loan to 3 other shifts. Unfortunately, I only got paid for 1 shift. The process of loaning gold that is on loan to you is called rehypothecation, and it's exactly what happened during the mortgage crisis with collateralized debt obligations. The word's got too many letters in it. And we all know how that bubble burst at the end and how our housing industry went into some kind of a nosedive into the dirt. Should an actual honest audit be performed, there's no telling what might come out of the dark. Lead-filled silver bars first started appearing in the early 1980s. As the price of silver skyrocketed, people began supplementing their silver holdings by drilling out the centers of bars and filling them with lead. If this could be done with silver, why couldn't it be done with gold as well? We don't know if all the gold shown on TV back in 1974 was actually solid gold or just gold-covered lead. An audit might also reveal that the government dumped some gold on the world market in order to manipulate prices. You may think our government would never do such a thing, but they did such a thing back in 1934 when they upped the price of the gold they had taken away from the citizens so the gold the government had would have more value. The government is in no hurry to alleviate our worries about what is actually in Fort Knox. The films such as Goldfinger, which was made in 1964, and Stripes, which was in 1981, were both filmed in Fort Knox. Goldfinger, they never actually showed the inside of the gold depository, and the Stripes, they just showed the outside of the building briefly. The guy that cut Bill Murray's hair in Stripes cut my hair as well. He told me all about it. He told the next guy in line as well as the guy after him. It's not every day you get a high and tight from a film star. Well, you did get to see his hands in the movie anyway. But his hands actually touched Bill Murray's head. Whoopee. I arrived at Fort Knox November 1st, 1985. It was pouring down rain and it was cold. We were run back and forth and yelled at a bunch before getting that first hearty meal consisting of some inedible meat with stringy vegetables and then marched off to bed. World War II had been over for 40 years, but those temporary barracks buildings were still there to welcome us on our first night in the Army. I was 25 at the time, kind of old to be joining the Army, but Coach, the guy that went with me, was 30. He was a football coach with a master's degree in education. When Sergeant Cobb saw Coach, he got up in his face and demanded to know who he was and what he was doing in basic. The coach told the whole deal, and we all got to do a whole lot of push-ups to show our appreciation of Coach's patriotism. It was okay. I learned a lot while stationed at Fort Knox. I learned that just because we were staying at the Disney barracks didn't mean we were going to see Mickey Mouse. I had to ask and got to do a whole bunch of push-ups to show how smart guys were treated. I learned how to sleep standing up during midnight guard duty. I learned how to eat in the rainstorm without getting too much water in my already runny food. I learned that no matter how much clothing I piled on, I could still nearly freeze to death. And I learned how to operate a tank. An M60 was quite a beast. 58 tons of steel with a 105 millimeter main gun. When you'd fire the main gun, the whole tank would rear backwards about 5 feet. Man, that was cool. I enjoyed most of my time in the military. You know how they always say, never volunteer? I went with just the opposite philosophy. As soon as the drill sergeant would say, we need a volunteer, I'd put my hand up. I would get sent on all kinds of glorious details, like I got to clean the officer's latrine. I got to pull guard duty on empty parking lots in the middle of the night. I got to go out and sweep the parking lot with a broom. I got to pick up cigarette butts outside the chow hall. I volunteered. Every time they would say, we need a volunteer, I already had my hand in the air before they even finished with the request. By the second month, I'd put my hand up, but I wouldn't always get chosen. A lot of times they would pick people standing on either side of me that didn't have their hands up. By the fourth month, I'd put my hand in the air, and they would tell me to put my hand back down. By the fifth month in what we called OSUT, one station unit training, I didn't go on a single detail the entire last month. Instead, on the weekends, I got to go to the KP. KP, I keep saying it. I got to go to the PX. I got to go to the theater and watch movies. In fact, I saw Stripes there. Got to do all kinds of things on the weekends while everybody else was pulling KP duty and guard duty and CQ duty. I had all the weekends off. So my plan worked out after all. During a short break in training, I got to go see the Gold Bullion Depository. The bus drove by and I could just make out the building off the side of the highway. We were on our way to the Patent Museum. As we went by, I looked at that building and I thought, how much gold is really in there? Each year, the Department of the Treasury is supposed to check to be sure the gold is still there. They then have to write up a report which is sent to the Government Accounting Office. The Government Accounting Office, or GAO, is supposed to keep these documents on file forever. A researcher doing a report on the gold in Fort Knox submitted a FOIA request, Freedom of Information Act request, asking for the reports from 1974 up until 1986. There should have been 13 of them. The GAO could only find 4. That's less than a third of the audits. Yet, during testimony before Congress, especially before congressman that was asking questions about the gold, the Secretary of the Treasury told him that he was 100% sure that the gold was there and had been accounted for and documented. He swore under oath that he knew it was there. In the few audits that could be found, it showed only 1/3 of the gold had actually ever been looked at. So how could he be 100% sure that all the gold was there if he only saw 1/3 of it? Not all of the gold the United States is supposed to own is in Fort Knox. A lot of the gold is stored in the Federal Reserve Bank in New York. Yes, that's a private bank. How much gold? Once again, we don't know. The gold is supposed to have been counted, weighed, inspected, and checked for purity on an annual basis. There's a regulation that says so, but for unknown reasons, the audits are seldom carried out. The vault the gold is held in is not sealed like the vaults in Fort Knox. The doors are supposed to have seals attached to the lock, so if anyone tampers with the door, the seal is broken and the folks in charge know it's time to have a look. But the doors on the New York Federal Bank aren't sealed. So, if the CEO of the bank decides he wants to take a bar of gold out and play with it, there's no way we will ever know. We just have to take his word for it that he's honest. 1953 report, 26 bars were assayed for bore samples. They would drill a small hole into the gold, then they would melt it down and check the purity. The assay tests found no irregularities. The person who conducted the test, the assayer, is unknown. He wasn't listed in the report and he never signed it. The assay report was not included in the audit report. It was filed separately. This is kind of like a doctor's report not being placed in a patient's file. The GAO report states that the gold was examined for its purity, but it doesn't say by who. It just might have been the guy's 3-year-old for all the information in the report. The next report states they found some irregularities in the gold. It wasn't as pure as it was supposed to be. Once more, the assayer didn't sign his name, and the report doesn't say who he was. It also doesn't say what the irregularities were or what was done about them. So the gold being held by the Federal Reserve Bank in New York isn't being watched very carefully. No seals on the vaults, no actual count of the gold, and no tests to show the gold is really all gold. So is there actually any gold in Fort Knox? The only proof we have is a film from 1974 showing a bunch of folks looking at a small room filled with shiny bars and then playing with 1 bar of gold. We can't even say for sure the gold they showed belonged to the United States or some other government. It may have been on loan from England or Germany for all we know. Does it really matter if the gold depository vaults are filled with gold covered with lead bars? Not as far as the dollar goes. My dollar will buy the same amount of food or fuel as if the entire building at Fort Knox were brimming with gold bars or not. Since we're no longer on the gold standard, it doesn't matter what is or isn't in the vaults. However, there is a pile of gold bars that belong to me and you. It belongs to every citizen of the United States. We own it. And somebody just might have stolen all of our gold. It doesn't matter who's sitting in the White House or the seats in Congress. The gold that belongs to the United States belongs to us. Think about it. Do you want the president of the Bank of Sweden or Denmark to have your gold sitting in his safe? Let's just say you have $100,000. Why are you still working? Oh, never mind. Wrong question. You have $100,000 in the bank. It's sitting in there safe and sound, just waiting for the day you might need it. So you go to the bank and you say you want to see your money. The clerk looks at the computer monitor and says, "Yep, it's there." Are you satisfied with the answer? You didn't actually see anything. All you got was the word of the clerk. Your money is still there. Do you walk away thinking your future is sound with all that money squirreled away? Don't you at least want to see a receipt for yourself? We don't even know how much gold we have in the vaults, let alone who it belongs to. Anytime some politician uses our gold to make themselves rich, it's the same as if they're reaching into your bank account and taking money away from your family. Yet they do it all the time. They loan gold to their friends, so their friends' banks don't go belly up from making too many shoddy deals, and then we get to pay the interest on the gold that we don't even have anymore. I hope you enjoyed tonight's show. If you did, tell your friends what they're missing. If you didn't enjoy it, don't tell anybody. If you want to listen to the archives, you can find them at strangethings.podomatic.com. And if you've got a suggestion for a show you'd like to hear, you can contact me at strangethings@arkanasa.com. Until next week, this is Chris James saying so long for now.
Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man, the same murder three? Strange things that happen here, how stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree?